From across time and space and throughout the multiverse, listen as two generations of comic book readers come together to discuss a single character or event that shaped pop culture as we know it. Let Your Geek Sideshow presents Then and Now with Susan and Kitty. Hey everyone, I'm Susan.
And I'm Kitty.
And today we're tackling Marvel's first non-team, a group of individual heroes with their own agendas.
All right.
Yeah, it's such like a crazy thing to think about because this Then and Now is possibly like the biggest gap between any generation of characters who were ever these characters. So with no official membership policy and a rotating roster of heroes, this group has handled threats on cosmic levels, like the real threats, or down on the street level. So don't ask them to assemble because this is the Defenders Then and Now. I like my little digs.
Yeah.
Because Kitty and I get into this debate constantly because my Defenders are the real Defenders. They defend the Earth.
Ugh.
That's what being a Defender means.
Ugh.
And her Defenders made a Netflix show.
Hello. Hashtag Where's Namor?
Yeah.
Not on Netflix's, that's for sure.
I always do. That's a little bit of an inside joke between Kitty and I because I'm always doing hashtag Where's Namor because Namor gets left out of so much. Way to go, licensing, because he's not in anything. Hashtag Where's Namor.
That'd be so funny if we were trying to compare. Be like, yeah, Doctor Strange has like long dark hair now and a leather jacket, and also like he's a girl, and
and I'm like, no.
Yeah, no, these Defenders are not the same in any respect. But I think that's like the perfect. I think it's almost the perfect example of what this Then and Now can be, how much changes between different generations of comic book readers.
And as much as I like to play, the mean card, like the my Defenders are better, you got to admit, like putting in a huge gap between the Avengers in the cinematic universe and the Defenders on Netflix is kind of a stroke of genius on Marvel's part.
Yeah.
Because they have the Earthbound and then now everyone in the Avengers is pretty much been to space. I think with the exception of maybe Cap.
Maybe.
Yeah.
We'll get
anyway.
him to space.
Yeah, we're not talking about them, though. We're talking about the Defenders.
So tell me about your Defenders and why they are so much better.
So my Defenders are from the 1970s. I wasn't alive then. But they were...
But that's why books exist.
That's why books exist. And that's why publications are important. Because you can read things from before you were born. But these characters were basically... They were first featured in a book that was called Marvel Features. And they put these characters together. Doctor Strange, the Hulk, Robert Bruce Banner. So... Bruce Banner before Robert Bruce Banner is Bruce Banner, right? Yeah. Anyway, it's weird. Anyway, and then Namor, the Submariner. Hashtag Where's Namor? But then they were so popular as like a team because if you think about it, you have like the brains, the brawn, and kind of like the mystic. Because Namor is very smart. And Namor runs a kingdom. And so he can do all that. And then, Doctor Strange, as much as I love him, the dude's a little bit arrogant. And he's they represented three different parts of Marvel superheroes at the time. And so they were kind of an obvious team. And then later they brought
But they were also a non-team.
They were also a non-team. Don't put labels on them. We're not going to label them just yet because they don't even have their own series. The Defenders didn't come on until later in around 1970 or 1972, 1973. Somewhere around there is when the Defenders actually got their own series. And that's when they started recruiting. They wound up with like Silver Surfer. They had Valkyrie,
Yeah.
Asgardian.
Yep, I like Valkyrie.
Yeah, and then even they had Hawkeye and Nighthawk and Hank Pym when he was Yellow Jacket.
Yeah.
And then Power Man.
Yeah.
So you're familiar with Power Man.
So he's kind of our bridge here.
He is. Luke Cage is the common ground between the two of us. We both can admit that Luke Cage is an actual Defender. The Defenders team also changes so often. Like even more so, I would say, people out there will argue with me, but it's as fluid as the Avengers team,
Oh,
I would say.
absolutely. You slap an adjective and you've got the secret defenders, the last defenders, the fearless defenders. You've got every type of defenders.
Totally.
That could happen.
I'm sticking when they were just the defenders.
Just the defenders.
Or before they even had a name, because they were the non-team. Because they, think of the personalities who wound up on the early team of the defenders.
Oh, absolutely.
None of them wanted to be on a team with anybody else. It was like Ego City.
Well, to be fair, they kind of kept that thread in the modern defenders. It's a very reluctant team up. And I love that about it because I love because the Avengers assemble and it's really cool when Cap calls them all and they all just, yep, this is my job. But just to watch people who really don't want to work together or they have to learn to trust each other to put them together on a team, I just think is super fun.
So there's the through line.
Yeah.
We're always looking for like what qualifies a then and now.
Yeah.
The qualification is the reluctance.
But they will defend.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating, though, that you have, from the Silver Surfer and Doctor Strange alone, you've got like almost the entire scape of the cosmic Marvel. Mm-hmm. And now Defenders, in the modern sense, is literally the most microcosmic, and it's Hell's Kitchen in Harlem kind of deal.
Yeah.
It's they don't go out of New York City. It's extremely focused and street level, and that's
so then what do they do when the aliens show up in New York?
They complain about it in veiled references on their Netflix shows. But I think it's interesting that they took that team and it's mutated enough that Defenders is the sensibility for the modern Marvel age of street heroes who don't go to space, who don't even really cross the country.
It's also really interesting for you to bring up the notion of trust, because that is a notion that crosses the Defenders both then and now. Doctor Strange does not trust easily. Hulk does not trust easily. Namor does not trust easily. There's even like various storylines where Namor is captured and like the Defenders are reluctant to save him and he's a member of their own team.
Oh, dear.
And it's just stuff that you think about. They just don't trust each other easily. Their egos are too big and they don't work well with others. If they had a kindergarten report card, that's what it would say.
Little frowny face.
Yeah.
That's wow.
I mean, look at your Defenders.
I
They
know.
don't play well with others either.
And we've got two more or less disciplined martial artists. We've got the guy who can he's unbreakable, and so one of my favorite things that kind of illustrates their whole relationship, if you don't watch anything else of the Defenders on Netflix or read anything about these characters, the hallway fight scene in the Defenders series, you see each of their individual fight styles. Jessica wants the fight over as fast as possible because she is not a fighter. So she will just slam herself around. Mm-hmm. Luke knows he can defend people like legitimately because he's unbreakable. So he will put himself between other people and his teammates. So I think he's one of the more trusting members of the group. Mm-hmm. And then Iron Fist is kind of young and spunky and not as disciplined as Daredevil. And so you can kind of see that in the way that he fights. But Daredevil is kind of the only consummate fighter of the group. And so it's fascinating to see the degrees of experience, how much they care about other people, how much they care about each other, and how they work off of one another in their fight style.
And mirrored that back to like 1971 when these guys were like first trying to be the Defenders. Mm-hmm. You have three people who don't fight well together. Because like how on earth does Hulk and Namor and Doctor Strange ever fight together? Mm-hmm. It just doesn't. Like Doctor Strange is a master of the mystic art, so he doesn't really fight. Like
he always strikes me as a guy who his moves are very finessed and calculated, and if the Hulk is running through smashing everything,
oh yeah,
you just ruined my entire plan.
Yeah, and then Namor is kind of like the more controlled fighter, like closer, somewhere as a hybrid between Iron Fist and Daredevil. Like he's hand-to-hand combat he can do, and he's very controlled with it, but at the same time he also knows when to improvise.
Right.
So you know that's kind of another thing where they just don't work. They don't necessarily work well as a team. Right. Which is why they're a non-team.
Which is why you love to watch them, though, because it's like how are they gonna put aside their differences and actually get the job
Which
done.
is kind of like one of my weak points in storytelling to begin with. It's like, well, how are you going to stop being the way that you are in order to like cooperate.
Put yourselves aside for a second for the greater good of the moment.
And it's something I think that we struggle with as people in general when because people have to go to work every day and most people work in an office and there are different personalities inside an office or even in your family life. Like there's different personalities in a family. And how do you work with those different personalities? How do you come together to work towards something like towards a project, towards, raising a child or whatever? And how do you do that?
And if your brother was kidnapped, would you say, so be it?
Exactly. So it's one of those things something that you and I have talked about so many times, and something that we love about Marvel Comics is the ability that they have to yes, these are the Defenders and they're defending against cosmic entities that are looking to destroy Earth as we know it, but also it's a very real human problem that we have to encounter on almost a daily basis, depending on what type of environment you find yourself in. Like, how do you put your own ego aside because you know that you need to accomplish this?
Right. And you brought up in the thread of kind of real life situations raising a child, I think one of the most interesting things for the Defenders comic when they assembled this team based on who they put in the Netflix universe, one of the biggest differences between their Netflix counterparts and now is Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are married and have a child. And I think throughout the entire Marvel universe, they're one of the most wholesome relationships despite all the hardships that they go through or how foul-mouthed Jessica is or all the problems they've had. Like, now they have to balance being heroes and having a daughter who, they don't know this yet, but she grows up to be Captain America in some alternate future comic book, but balancing the heroism with this other relationship. Or
I like Jessica and Luke as a couple because they accept one another's reality.
Oh yeah.
And that's something that you see a lot of comic book couples fail, and it's because they're fighting against one another's reality. Like, I don't want, if your powers were like all these what ifs,
right?
But Jessica and Luke don't do that. They just have this immense acceptance of one another for exactly who they are, and it's kind of beautiful.
And like a bad guy will show up and instead of being like, this is your problem, like that, it'd be like, is that from your backstory or mine? Let's take him down together. Like it's just such a cool relationship. And unfortunately, they don't have that same dynamic in the Netflix series. They do have some really fun chemistry, which is, why they introduced Luke in Jessica's series. He's such a quintessential part of her kind of origin story, which is only 16 years old, which is so bizarre to think of.
I know.
Luke's been a Defender longer than Jessica's been a comic book character.
I know.
So
Luke's been a Defender like twice as long as she's been a comic book character.
But I think it's super fun, and it's not completely unheard of that they would put these characters together. So 2013 is when they announced the Netflix series, and then Charlie Cox was the first one that they had for Daredevil, obviously. And as they started kind of knocking down these dominoes, it was really cool to see who was going to be put into this universe, because Luke Cage always obviously brings in Iron Fist because of their Heroes for Hire history, and that also really predates it's back in the 60s, 70s kind of era. Yeah. And Jessica Jones has a relationship with Matt Murdock in Alias from 2002. And so then when they bridged Luke and Jessica, it kind of naturally set the stage back in the early 2000s for what this kind of very, very Hell's Kitchen themed team up could be. But they never all interacted as a foursome in that context until they put the Netflix shows out, and then they started to bring their comic books back, because Jessica hadn't had a series for a while, or a solo series for a while, and neither did Luke or Danny. I think they'd been on and off. And so they really brought them back and started gearing up the audience to think of these characters in comparison with one another, or like, hey, these guys all have a history together. So I think that's really fun.
That is really fun. It's also interesting that Luke bridges two separate characters together, because Luke is also the bridge that takes you and I together. So it's just interesting that Luke, because of his protective nature, can be such a character that you can throw on various teams, and he will perform in that protective manner, but also be able to kick anybody's butt.
And the fact that his heroism has oftentimes been for hire. Like
Yeah.
his business is superheroing. So
Yeah.
he almost seems like the least reluctant one of these characters to assemble, because he's like, okay, like, wifey, now we're going to do this. And oh, here's our lawyer. Or in the new series, they actually don't know his identity. So it goes back to the issue of trust. Somehow Daredevil's secret identity is back in the bag, and he's in the Shadowlands costume, and so he's like super mysterious, but no one on this team knew who he was.
It makes me laugh because he seems the most obvious one.
Right?
Like it doesn't, I mean,
Because Jessica doesn't even pretend, and most of the rest of them don't even have secret identities. But the one costumed hero who does have an identity, the master detective can't figure it out. She doesn't know who he is.
that's crazy. Yeah. So the Defenders for me have always been this team that we're talking about randomness or connections or all these different things, but mine have always been cosmic. So to see a Defenders team on the Netflix series that is basically covering like 50 blocks of New York City, like the Bronx to
If they can be bothered.
Yeah, Hell's Kitchen, and probably not even all of the blocks, just the ones that they care about. So it was very interesting to have to adjust to the mentality of the Defenders being like, oh, so you're defending like this very basic element of what the Marvel universe is. Like you're just defending New York, not the whole earth. You don't have like spells that you're pulling from ancient texts and relics that you have set up to like make the spells more powerful, and you don't have points around the world, or you don't have the 7 seas or gamma radiation. Like there's nothing in there.
Luke's got a hoodie, Jessica's got a leather jacket and a bottle of whiskey, Daredevil's got billy clubs, and Iron Fist has his glowing fist.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. And you talk about the characters who, like, if they could be bothered. Stephen Strange is like the opposite of an if he could be bothered character. He's the character that, like, when he was a surgeon was like going to take on every single project that he could take on that he cared about. So there's this like yes and no. It's similar but different, because it's just like while I'm talking about this, I was like, actually, Stephen Strange is kind of an if he could be bothered character too. And my point in my notes is like the opposite of that. But yeah, he kind of is an if he could be bothered character too. Granted, his job is to be a doctor.
His if he could be bothered kind of seems more of an ego thing rather than a like, this is not my scene.
Yeah, it's not a not bored. It's not a passive thing. The way Jessica just like is like, whatever. Ugh.
She's like, my office got blown up again. I guess I have to kick someone's ass.
Yeah,
like,
my office got blown up again. Guess I have to find a new one and figure out who did that. Like, who's after me? Like, it's interesting versus like Doctor Strange can't be bothered attitude, where it's like that case isn't interesting enough for me,
or it's beneath me.
Yeah, it's beneath me. And that you're right. The difference is ego, and the difference actually in our teams is ego.
I think it almost also has to do with the nature of the threats they're facing. I mean, there's the street level, which is like, this is my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like, this is where I live, versus this is the entire Marvel cosmos.
And it takes a certain amount of hubris in order to take on the entire cosmos.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you have to have a certain level of arrogance to be able to be like, just stand there and like, you know, because you have, even in Doctor Strange, it's not even just the cosmos, it's other dimensional forces. Like,
oh, absolutely.
And that's why he recruits Clea from the Dark Dimension at one point. She's never called a full member, but you know, they were married at one point. So it's just a really interesting thing to like think about what it takes to have another dimension come at you and to be like, nope, bye, versus just like, this is my neighborhood, this is where I grew up, this is where I work, please don't mess with my livelihood. Because that's another thing that your Defenders do. It's please don't mess with my livelihood.
Oh yeah, because they're working out of their storefronts. I mean, in the latest Defenders series, like Luke and Danny actually resurrected their Heroes for Hire storefront, and at the very end they're kind of like, hey, we should get back into this heroing business.
Aww.
Jessica's working out of a bakery because Alias got blown up, and
again
and Matt Murdock has, I don't know, like a lawyer practice somewhere, or he's hanging out at Josie's or Fogwell's. But another thing that comes up, we're talking about the cosmic versus the neighborhood, because your characters are from the 70s, I almost immediately associate first of all, the pulpier comic books in your hand, like just that texture.
Yeah.
But a lot more color and visual intrigue, because I mean, you've got such visual powers for Doctor
It's true.
Strange. And my Defenders they're kind of plucked from the Marvel Knights and Marvel Max era, which was dark
and
all
gritty,
the time.
noir. Like it was very
inky and
like the color palette was very
dull.
Yeah, but not dull. It was like muted.
Yeah. And if you watch any of their individual Netflix shows or even just the Defender series, they probably kept the whoever makes those colored lights that go over lights for filming, like they kept that group in business, because every time I didn't even have to watch the show.
Like the gels that you put over.
The light gels, because I didn't even have to watch the scene in full to know, oh, the scene has some red to it, it's Daredevil, or this is green, it's Iron Fist. Like,
that's
they
hilarious.
each have a very distinct color.
Yeah.
But in that universe, it's very dark.
Wow, that's cool. No, mine are very bright.
And Jessica's blue and Luke gets yellow.
Jessica's not purple?
It's a blue purple.
Okay.
But following her dealing with Kilgrave, they've switched it to blue because she's sad, but it's not as purple.
Okay. Okay. All right. Fair. Yeah, but mine are very colorful, and you definitely have all the like Celestials coming in, and like Elders of the Universe coming in, and like there's all these different entities that possibly come in, like even Dormammu and various like Clea's the daughter of Dormammu, so it is a very colorful 70s pulpy comic book look to it.
And I think it's fun because this Defenders series for Netflix and the modern comics have also kind of gotten some nods into a lot of these characters who are the supporting cast for these characters also had runs on the Defenders. Like I know Misty Knight. Colleen Wing I don't think she was a Defender, but she's definitely palled around with some of these teams. And then Hellcat.
Yeah, I was going to say Hellcat.
Hellcat's a big one.
A big Defender.
Hopefully she'll be getting more action.
Yeah, she came
Netflix,
in like the late 70s, and then she was on that team.
But even she is a radioactive yellow, bright costume, fun character.
Oh, for sure.
Quippy.
And especially back in the 70s, she was very like her headpiece and everything.
Yeah.
She was awesome.
Yeah. So it's fun that they still get to include references to these other heroes, even though the focus is on kind of a big four right now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if fans are looking to read the Defenders, my Defenders, the original
The Defenders then.
the real Defenders.
Whoa, hey now.
Okay, fine. How about this? The OG Defenders.
Better.
There you go. Then just read the original Defenders series. It's just called The Defenders. If you want to try to track down Marvel features, you can. It's very difficult to find, at least in...
Probably a pretty key issue.
Yeah.
In a back issue.
But I think when researching this podcast to tell you guys where to find stuff, I couldn't find where it was collected. So maybe you guys can help us out in the comments.
Check with your local comic book store and then help us out.
But really just it started in 1972. You want to read that Defenders, and it's a lot of fun, guys, especially if you're into the really pretty art from back then as well.
Yeah. And if you guys are looking for modern, definitely get yourself a Netflix subscription if you haven't already. Marvel is a machine with these shows.
Who doesn't have a Netflix subscription now?
You never know. You never know. We've got
all right, fair.
To the one listener who doesn't have a Netflix subscription, please do yourself a favor. So Marvel's got all of those going, and it's super fun. And Luke Cage is about to enter its sophomore season, and Iron Fist, and they've got a bunch of stuff rolling. And then for this team up, it's been pretty short-lived in the comics. There's 2 volumes called Diamonds Are Forever and Kingpins of New York. Still very, very
I wonder
street
who
level.
the villain is.
Maybe Diamondback and Kingpin.
Oh.
But there's a lot of current volumes of these characters in their solo series. But if you really do want to see them all together with that quippy banter and nobody wants to be on this team together, it's those 2 volumes from 2017.
That's awesome. So no matter what form this non-team, keep calling, well, they're not a team. They don't want to be. No matter what form the non-team takes, one thing is clear, they're here to defend. So thank you so much for joining us today. That's the Defenders Then and Now. This has been Then and Now. For more ad-free pop culture news and content, visit geeksideshow.com. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.